Okay, this next video is in relation to drawing lines. It's very easy to draw lines in AutoCAD, and the fantastic thing about it is that the accuracy that you get, you just won't get with a paper drawing. Now, you'll need to understand how to draw lines in different ways, because it all depends on the information you have in order to be able to draw that line. So take an example. If you have two coordinates, you draw a line from one coordinate to another coordinate. If you've got an angle and a distance, you draw a line from along the angle and the distance, but you really need a start point. So you need a start point, an angle and a distance, and that will draw a line for you as well. The other way you can go about doing it is if you have just the angle and the distance, and you just decide upon your own start point. You can do it that way as well. So there's a number of ways of doing this, and these are referred to as the absolute coordinate method, the relative coordinate method, and then the polar coordinate method. And we'll look at all three here now. And to understand the polar coordinate method, you have to understand that AutoCAD is set up so that you can give everything a distance and an angle. So if I take line here and specify a start point, if I point out here, you can see from the within the yellow circle there, you have 0 degrees. So what we have is we have a distance and then 0 degrees. As I move the cursor up, you'll see that degree is changing. So that's just the angle each time. So we can set that up for degrees, minutes, seconds, or we can set it up as a decimal place. Now, because I have this clicked on, which is our polar tracking, it'll actually click on when I go to 0. It's going to click on when I get to 45. You see it just clicks into position. 90, and so on. So if you look at this, this is set at 0 here. You come up 90, come down here 180, 270, and back to 0. Now from this point of view, you're really looking at, this is 90, you're running back from here, and it runs back to 0. But all your angles are going in an anti-clockwise direction. So if you're putting in an angle, if you're going up, it's going up at an angle. If you're going down, you could put in minus the angle, or else you could go right around to here. So you could actually put in a distance and then minus 20 degrees, and that will give you a line that will appear to look something like that. So that's an important thing to understand. The other important thing to understand here is that you have the X and the Y coordinates. So you've got your X and your Y. This is your X axis, this is your Y axis, and every location on your AutoCAD drawing has a point on the X axis and a point on the Y axis. So if I was drawing a line and I knew the two coordinates, well, what I'd be doing is I'd be drawing it from a particular point on the X and Y to a particular point on the X and Y. And that is your absolute coordinate method. The relative coordinate method is when you have a start point, but you don't necessarily have the absolute coordinate for the next point, but you know that it's a particular distance along the x-axis and a particular distance along the y-axis, and then at that point you can put in at and then the distance. Okay, so when drawing lines at an angle, you have to begin measuring the angle from 0 degrees, which is, say, at 3 o'clock, as we said there. If you drew a line at 90 degrees, it will go straight up. So that one will go straight up at, say, 12 o'clock. And there are a couple of examples of this. Okay, you might not always have an obvious reference point for 0 degrees. Okay, so sometimes it's not always that obvious that you have a reference point for 0 degrees. So you don't know what your angle is. So depending, but that does actually matter, and it's important that you do actually work out the angle. Okay, so if we look first of all at the absolute coordinates, so when we're using this method, you just enter the points they relate to from the UCS, which is down here. Okay, and then it gives us that exact point. So if I click on line and I put in 2000, 2000. So that's 2000 millimeters along the x-axis and 2000 millimeters along the y-axis, and press enter. And then I draw a line and I want to go, say, 2000 along the x-axis. So I go to, my point would be 4000, comma 2000. Okay, and it's given me a point here. So what it's given me here is, if I click on ID, I'll just try that again. So if we go line, I just okay. So if we just continue on from there, what actually happened there was, in my settings, there was a default set at relative. So, and I'll show you how to change that at the end, but I've just gone and changed it. So if I go line again, I go 2000, comma 2000, okay, enter. And then I put in my next point, and I'm saying my next point is actually 4000 along the x-axis and 2000 along the y-axis. So it should give us a point up along here. I go 4000, comma 2000, enter, and that gives us a point. So if I click on my command line and go ID, enter, see, it's giving me a point there, which is 2000, 2000. ID will actually give you the point, and we talked about that in class. And then if I do that again, do ID, specify the point here, it's giving me x-axis of 4000, 2000. So that's a method using the absolute coordinate system. The next system I can use is the relative system. So again, if we wanted to draw a line from, we go line, enter, then this is using the relative system, and I'm going to draw a line from the point, the first point, so it's 2000, comma 2000, and then I'm going to put in, because I want to go 2000 along the x-axis and 2000 along the y-axis, so it should bring us out to here and up 2000 up to here, so it should bring us up to about here. And I know that point, I could work that point out because it's from 2000 here, from the origin here, it's 2000 and it's 2000, so it'll be 4000, 4000, but I don't have to work it out. I can just put in at 2000, comma 2000. And it draws that line again. I go ID, I click ID on this, and it gives me a point of 4000, 4000. So it's when you put at in front of it, it's relative to this point. It's 2000 along here and 2000 up along here, and that gives you your point using the relative method. The next method then is the polar coordinates. Okay, so if we're looking at polar coordinates, what you're doing is you're putting in at, the distance, your greater than sign on your keyboard, and then your distance. Okay, so an example of this is that if I went line and I started at my first point, 2000, comma 2000. Now I want to go at, put in my distance, so I'm going to go 2000, and I'm going to go up along the y-axis. So I'm going to put in angle sign, and I'm going to put in 90, and if you knew that's 0, this up here is 90. So that should go 2000 up along here along at 90 degrees. So, and that's what it's done. It's gone from here at the distance, the angle, and that's, now for some of you that's going to be a really, really important way to draw, because a lot of the time you're carrying out surveys and you will have a station point, a back site, and from that then you'll have angles and distances. So it's going and drawing those angles and distances you need to get your head around. Now, if I go back just to show you one thing before we finish up here, is there is also one other thing that you need to look at, and that's the D settings. So if I type in D settings, before you start, you need to go into this. You'll find there's a lot of different settings, and we come into it a number of times over this module. But if you go to dynamic input, go to pointer input, we go to settings, and click there is a format that allows you to do relative coordinates or absolute coordinates. Click on absolute coordinates and OK. If you click on relative coordinates, again, what will happen is everything will be relative to the first point, but it can be relative by inserting at, and I just think that's a cleaner way of doing it. Okay, this is the end of our second tutorial, and I just like people to go away and practice that. Now, I've given some exercises for you to do. Some of them are on web courses, and just have a look and just practice drawing lines using the 3 methods. Now, okay.